Have you been told you need to stop doing what you love, whether it's exercise, running, or a sport? Well, here at Dynamic, we don't like that answer. In this podcast, we'll talk to leaders in the health and wellness space from Southwest Florida to get the solutions you need to get you back to doing what you love. Welcome to the Dynamic Naples Podcast. What's going on? It's Dr. Chris here. Today I want to talk about 4 lifestyle triggers that may be affecting or causing your chronic pain. But before we dive into that, we have to talk about what's called the HPA axis. It's a part of your endocrine system. It stands for your hypothalamus, how it affects your pituitary gland, which in turn affects your adrenal gland, and that tells the adrenals to either secrete or stop secreting cortisol. This is a normal response to stress or the sympathetic fight-or-flight state. So under a normal state, if everything is working correctly, if you are being chased by a bear or get into a bar fight, that whole system is stimulated, and then cortisol is secreted, and the body will start to do certain things for that emergency event. So it will liberate glucose into the bloodstream so you can have some energy to burn, some quick energy. And it will also turn off certain things. You don't really need to be in an inflamed state in a fight or something like that, so the immune system is suppressed. So what that means is cortisol is actually a very strong anti-inflammatory. All right. So think about cortisone cream. The cortisone is basically synthetic cortisol. Or if you've ever had a corticosteroid injection, that's basically cortisol. It's a strong anti-inflammatory. So that's what happens under normal circumstances. Now, if you are kind of chronically in a sympathetic state, which most of us are, you're basically constantly spiking that system. And much like having 4 cups of coffee a day, that caffeine doesn't quite hit you the same way. That basically stops having an effect. A similar thing happens. So if you're chronically in a sympathetic state, you basically there's a number of things that can develop with your cortisol system, but you can flatline it. That's a really common thing. It basically flatlines and maybe even increases it later in the day. And that's not good because the normal pattern is when you first wake up, when you get some sun or any kind of light in your eye, cortisol is spiked, which is good. You go into a sympathetic state to start your day. You want that energy to get out of bed and do what you have to do. And then it starts to decline. Then you kind of get like a second bump in the afternoon and then declines further so you're able to sleep. Because if you're secreting cortisol, it's very hard to go to sleep. Cortisol and melatonin basically are opposites. So what happens is you can basically flatline it, like I said, and then you never get the anti-inflammatory effect of cortisol. People that are in chronic pain tend to feel the worst in the morning. That's probably why. They're just not getting that anti-inflammatory effect of cortisol. So if you want to check, this is a quick little assessment, not a perfect test, but you can kind of get a feel for if you're in a sympathetic state or parasympathetic, is lay down, take a couple deep breaths, and just observe what rises first. Does your belly rise first? Does your chest rise first? So chest first breathing is more associated with a sympathetic state, whereas belly first breathing is more associated with the parasympathetic state. So they're both supposed to rise, just what happens first. That kind of gives you a little bit of a proxy of where you are. And you can sort of reverse engineer this and turn on the parasympathetic state by focusing on belly first breathing. Belly rises as you inhale and descends as you exhale. So that just gives you an idea of where you are. So now we can dive into some of these lifestyle triggers that may be affecting the system. So there's sort of 4 pillars of what affects the HPA axis and puts it into dysregulation. And the more you have of these, the more likely you develop an HPA axis dysfunction. So the first one I'll address, because I don't like this one, is inflammation. I don't really like the word inflammation. It's kind of a vague term. Not all inflammation is bad. So the way I see it is acute and local inflammation is good. So you roll your ankle, it swells up, that's good. Inflammation is the first part of the healing process. I differentiate between inflammation and swelling. Inflammation starts the healing process. Swelling is the leftover components that you want to get out of the system. So what I'm talking about with the HPA axis and the dysregulation is when you have chronic and sort of systemic inflammation. And there's a lot of things that can trigger that. So you could have a food sensitivity, so gluten and dairy being sort of the most common ones. If you don't know it and you're having gluten and you basically are living in a inflamed state, you can definitely trigger your HPA axis in a negative way. You could have mold intolerance or mold exposure in general. If you're a smoker, if you don't exercise at all, a lot of these things can contribute to a systemic and chronic inflamed state. So that's number one. Number two would be blood sugar dysregulation. So I'm talking about diabetes, prediabetes, or even trending towards prediabetes. Most of us, as we age, tend to become a little pre-diabetic in this country, at least, mostly because of our food supply. And you know, I hear this all the time. I got my A1C checked and everything was normal. It's in the normal range. Okay, maybe, but it's not a perfect blood marker. Very few of the blood markers are perfect proxies for how you're doing. You have to look at the whole pattern of your blood sugar. And you may be in what's quote-unquote normal, but remember that 88% of Americans are pre-diabetic and don't know it. And what is normal is just norm on a bell curve. So it doesn't, just because you fall in the sort of lab range of normal, doesn't necessarily mean that you're A-okay with your blood sugars. My favorite thing to do to recommend is to get a glucose monitor, and at least for a month, and just see if you stay within normal ranges, and see how foods affect you. That's the other thing too, is a fasting A1C doesn't tell you enough, because you got to see how food affects you. In your fasted state, chances are that's when your blood sugar is at its lowest. So the next one I want to talk about is good old-fashioned stress, the way we think of stress, perceive stress. So technically what I've talked about so far, these are all stressors to that HPA axis, but I'm talking about actual mental, psychological, financial, those types of stresses. And who isn't stressed these days? So some simple tips to deal with stress is you basically have to identify what's causing it and either eliminate it or find some way to mitigate it. So a few tips: learn how to say no more often, avoid negative people, or maybe go on a news fast. I know that helped me. And stop getting into useless internet debates. Seeking parasympathetic activities such as walking in nature, getting massage, meditation, breath work is really good. Even the ice baths are really good. All are great ways to help mitigate and manage stress. And then the next one I want to talk about, and the last one, is circadian disruption. All right, the more I talk to my patients, the more I'm realizing how big of a problem this is. And this generally occurs, there's other reasons for it. You can be jet lagged or have shift work. Those are really bad for the HPA axis. But for most people, it's either not enough exposure to natural light or too much exposure to blue light from electronics. So you really should keep your cell phone out of your bedroom, and it should be a priority in the evening. If you want to watch Netflix TV at night, I would recommend getting some blue light blocking sunglasses that will help reduce the amount of blue light in your eyes. So you want to really get like 15 to 30 minutes of natural light without sunglasses, by the way. So going on like a morning walk is a really good idea to help take care of this. Check out Andrew Huberman. He's done a ton of podcasts on natural light and how important it is for circadian rhythm. So the bottom line is that pain is complicated, and if you are in a chronic state of pain, you got a swollen knee or swollen ankle, just doesn't seem to go away, you have to dial in the diet and lifestyle factors first before you can ever eliminate this for good. So that's all I have for you. I'll be talking to you soon. In the next few weeks, I'll be diving into functional blood chemistry, and we'll get more into the blood sugars. Why guess when you can test? Do you get hangry or crash after a carb-heavy meal? These could be indicators that there is a dysfunction in your blood glucose regulation. If left unchecked, it can lead to irreversible changes. If you catch it quick enough, you can make diet and lifestyle changes that will get your levels where they need to be. 88% of Americans are pre-diabetic and don't know it. Diabetes underpins many of the pathologies we deal with in this country, such as obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease, and stroke. For some reason, it is rarely screened with your physician, and if they do test for blood glucose, it's usually with an A1C or a fasting glucose, which can sometimes give you a false negative. NutriSense is a company that supplies continuous glucose monitors. We've paired with NutriSense to get you real-time data to see how your physiology responds to glucose. The NutriSense app lets you track your daily activity to see how food, sleep, exercise, and stress impact your glucose. You can log or import this data into the NutriSense app to see the effect on your blood glucose levels as soon as it happens. Use the code DrChris25 for $25 off your order today. Do you have unexplained pain? Or do you wonder just how healthy you are? When was the last time you had your blood tested? Blood chemistry analysis is a great tool to stay ahead of any health conditions, and now you can have control of your health with Let's Get Checked. Let's Get Checked is an incredible company that sends blood tests to your home. You can choose from over 30 different tests, whether that's thyroid function, testosterone, micronutrient, cholesterol, or C-reactive protein, which is a marker for inflammation. It is sent to you with free shipping, and you get your results in 2 to 5 days. No physician referral needed. Use the code DPT25 for 25% off. You can find links in the show notes. Did you know that you can get started with physical therapy without a physician's referral? Physical therapists don't just solve pain, we get down to the root cause and keep it from coming back. We also discuss all things health, such as nutrition and lifestyle changes. If you feel that you could use some help, let's get on a free consult call. Go to www.dynamicnaples.com and sign up for a free call. Also, if you like this podcast, please give us a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us spread the message. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.